to join the Leap Together conference. I was also a member of the advisory committee helping to put this together, so it's been a great deal of fun and an honor to bring together these two wonderful worlds. So today we have four very diverse speakers who are going to each speak from their own perspective on a transition program that they've closely been associated with. And we're going to start with each of them making about a 5-minute presentation. Then we will have sort of an on-stage discussion, entre nous, if you will. And then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So as you hear things that maybe intrigue you or you want more information on, just make a note, and we'll address those later on. Okay, so we'll get started. Our first speaker will be Lauren Gordon. Lauren is a career counselor, trainer, and psychotherapist in New York, co-author of Career Transitions in Applying Sports Psychology, Four Perspectives, and she's consulted for the employee assistance programs of Major League Baseball and Women in Sports and Events, amongst other sports organizations. She was also career counselor at Career Transition for Dancers in New York for 14 years and has counseled dancers all across the United States. And so I've asked Lauren to start because she's going to present some principles that she thinks are kind of essential for any successful transition program. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. And I think the first thing I wanted to say, I'm mic'd, right?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to put out a nod to Alex Dubé, who had been one of the founders of Career Transition for Dancers and was its executive director and president until the end of 2015. And he gave me a chance after my sports and being a therapist and career counselor, knowing that those skills could adapt to working with dancers. And so I wanted to give Alex a shout out for that. He died in May of 2016, and many of people in this room, have worked with him for many, many years. I was really pleased to be on this panel because I've been studying career transition organizations for over 15 years, and I was very proud to be a co-writer of the chapter that you were mentioning. And we were looking about 10 years ago about what are really great models of career transition programs, and I'll focus my information and remarks on the U.S., but I think they can be applied internationally. The two programs that we had talked about as being really great models when this article came out, now about 10 years ago, was the National Football League Players Engagement Program in partnership with their NFL Players Association, and Career Transition for Dancers. And now, of course, Career Transition for Dancers is affiliated and part of the Actors Fund. Christopher Bloodworth is in our audience, and I'm sure he'll be very happy to talk to you more about what's currently going on at Career Transition for Dancers. But both of these models, the NFL and the Career Transition for Dancers, I think really are great examples of the breadth of information that can be offered, the kinds of programs that can be offered, in some ways following the career models that we were hearing about yesterday, the four philosophies of career development programs. And I'll mention those more in a little too. So we're talking about being able to reach out to as many members as possible and in as many ways as possible. And I think it's going to be interesting, the United States Olympic Committee ACE program is now aspiring to be on that level as well, similar to the program that we were hearing about yesterday in Canada. And so looking forward to hearing more about that. So optimum components of career transition programs. I'll put this out here as a challenge, and hopefully it's something that people will embrace. That we're really looking at a whole lifespan perspective that Super was talking about. And it's also incorporating bridge and the chance, happenstance, and positive uncertainty, because many of these components are part of what happens in any counseling session we don't know what happens in a counseling session until the session is over. And I think many of these components are things that the counselors are embracing. So career counseling has to be a core component, not only coaching, but career counseling. And also some kind of mental health access. If it's not part of the program itself, you have to need some kind of affiliation or resources to provide for the emotional and mental health needs of your athletes and dancers. We're talking about programs that need to be multicultural and inclusive and access to everybody from pre-professionals to the older members of one's community. So we're talking about LGBTQ affirmative, and I know we'll be talking more about that later, gender equality. There's a model called the respectful model, which incorporates, all these issues. We're looking at people as a person who happens to be an athlete or dancer. So we're looking at their family background, their ethnic background, their religious background, their history, their socioeconomic background. All these are components of any person, as a whole person that we need to understand. It's going to be very important to have certain kinds of peer support, both involved in the emotional level as well as for networking. That peer-to-peer support is a key ingredient in any program. We're talking about having some kind of educational component, from GED to college to technical skills to being able to have access to these courses online. We're talking about some kind of financial wellness component for people who have not had to manage their funds before, whether it's going to be $10 billion, if you're so lucky, or somebody who has no money now because their contract ended and their unemployment benefits ran out. We're talking about having a toolbox of career resources, so skill building, assessments, social media, public speaking, being able to help people connect to, Holland's Reyesek chart. Some people might be familiar with the world of work: realistic, artistic, investigative, social, entrepreneurial, and conventional. Every part of work can fit into this chart, and to have access to people who are in those fields for dancers and athletes to be able to talk to, whether an informational interview or following them around that day, so having those kinds of resources. We're talking about people who are interested in being in their own business, whether small or large, having access to those services, and also access to career and job development, internship programs, things like that. There needs to be a physical health and wellness component or liaison as well. And we're also hoping that there's some kind of financial assistance or grants component for people who need that startup to go back to school. We're also expecting that from now on, every program will have a very vibrant online presence, both video conferencing, webinars, teleconferencing, both one-to-one and in groups. And that there will be a community building, which of course we're doing today, being able to connect with other organizations and share resources and share issues and be able to be helping each other and our community. And finally, I guess this is point number 12. I'd like to see every program have a mission of changing the system where it's not working and being a model of an advocate for dancers and athletes. Some of us who are despairing after the elections in the U.S. last week, I think it's more important than ever that our programs do exist, because we're not going to give back benefits and rights and ways of living that maybe the Republicans are threatening to take back. And I'd like to see dancers and athletes be advocates if they wish to be. I think it would be a very healthy mental health goal for athletes and dancers who want to be advocates to be able to be supported by their programs. So I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say, and the audience as well, in terms of these 12 points. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. That's a lot to think about, and that got real very fast. Our next speaker is Paul Bronkhorst. He joined the Netherlands Dance Institute in 1986, and in 2011 was appointed Executive Director of the Transition Program for Dancers. He's been responsible for a number of international conferences in various countries. He is also a board member of the Dance House Foundation Amsterdam, and president and member of the International Organization for the Transition of Professional Dancers. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about your experience in the Netherlands, please.
Our experience in the Netherlands, well, these are quite wide. Our program is in existence since 30 years now. I would first like to start with echoing what Lauren was mentioning first about Alex. He has been a very valued member of the IUTPD, and unfortunately we will have to miss him. After this 2-day conference, we will have our annual meeting with the IUTPD here in Toronto, and we'll certainly miss his presence there. Also, what occurred to me is that the 12 points that were mentioned by Lauren really indicate how widespread the topics are that dancers deal with once they have to stop dancing. It reminded me of my very first visit to Toronto in 1988. I remember that Joyce-Ann Sidimus, she organized a conference about transition, and I participated in a workshop from 2 psychologists. And they were explaining a model that each change in a lifetime, whether you move or do an exam or some change, whatever could happen to you, a divorce, things like that, that could be expressed on a scale from 0 to 100. And each and every change was a certain indication of that. And then they added up all the changes, and they also said a number of 150 would be bearable, would be doable. That is something manageable for individuals. But then they added up all the changes that take place once a dancer stops dancing. And if you add all those changes up and you apply the numbers to it, then it adds up to 400. In other words, making transition should not be doable. The great thing is that by now we have many proofs that dancers are definitely capable of making the transition and very successfully. Worldwide, we have 11 countries that have the disposal of a program that is supposed to help dancers that provide support to dancers who stop dancing. These countries are united in the international organization, and I'd like to mention them just to make sure everybody knows where we can find them. It's in the USA, of course, and then we have Canada. South Korea has a program, and then in Europe it's the Netherlands, Germany, France, Switzerland, and since France, I mentioned already, the UK as one of the oldest programs that exists. And then finally, 2 newcomers, Poland and the Czech Republic. If I focus on the situation in the Netherlands, as I mentioned, the program is in existence since 30 years. It was founded in 1986. It was the result of a donation by the Ministry of Culture, who gave the dance community an amount of 1 million guilders. That is approximately 450,000 euros. And I have to admit, I have no clue how many Canadian dollars that would be, but
many.
That was something we had to start with. The clear message that was given by the Ministry of Culture was that this was meant to make a foundation that is meant to support dancers when they have to stop dancing. They also said, well, what is conditional is that both dancers as well as companies should contribute to make sure that on the long run the program would be sustainable. So from that moment on, each and every dancer who works for a structurally funded company pays 1% to our program, and the company adds 3%. This 4% altogether, that's what we call one premium, one contribution. And our support is based on the number of contributions people have paid to our program. Where it comes down to, the objective of our program is clearly to guide dancers through the whole transition process, to help dancers choose a second career, and I deliberately make the distinction between the transition process and choosing a second career, because I think that is 2 different things. We also focus at the necessity to finance the necessary retraining and to guarantee a certain income level when somebody is studying to pursue a new career. The starting point of our program is that we want to make custom-made support. We want to provide custom-made support, made-to-measure solutions for individual situations, because each and every individual is different. The way we do that is by providing counseling services as well as financial support. And like I said, in order to become eligible for the support of our program, dancers have to pay contributions to our system. 1%, like I said, is paid by the dancer, and 3% is paid by the companies. Then we provide two types of support. The first is every dancer who has paid 60 contributions to our programs, who has been dancing for 60 months, because the 1% is taken out of the monthly salary. After having paid 60 contributions, they are eligible for the refund of study cost. That can add up to a maximum amount of 10,000 euros. Then the second option that we provide is what we call a study and income allowance. This is meant for dancers who have been dancing during a period of at least 10 years and have paid during those 10 years at least 96 contributions. Once they've done that, they can apply for the full support, the full grant as we call it, meaning it is a contribution towards the cost of living, subsistence, as well as a contribution to the refund of study costs. The amount is not fixed for study income allowance because it is based on the number of contributions people have made to our program, as well as their average salary during their whole dancing career. But to give you an idea, in average it is about 65 to 75,000 euros that we can make available for each and every study plan. It's not an amount that people just get. They have to present a plan that has to be approved by the board. And we as an organization try to counsel dancers in that respect, that they are able to present a plan that will be approved by the board, so as much as possible. And then the cost of all the plans will be covered by the support of our program. In the Netherlands, the program is embedded in the collective labor agreement, so therefore it's considered an important labor condition. What is clearly viewed, and that's something I think I could add to what you just mentioned, it is a shared interest between dance companies and unions. I remember yesterday a question about the responsibility of dance companies, and to me that's very clear. I think if you are a good employer, you have to take care of your employees. And not only while they are working for you, but also when they are necessarily leaving the company because they have to stop dancing, for instance. Two key elements, I think, for transition in general would be counseling service as well as financial support. One doesn't go without the other. Yesterday we had a very interesting panel discussion here about methods of career counseling, and all very true and very helpful. But there was one thing that I really missed, which was the aspect of financial support. In the Netherlands, we have noticed that, and I'm pretty sure that other colleagues where transition programs exist can confirm that, that once you can offer people perspective, meaning financial support, it makes the whole transition process a little bit easier.
Right. So if I could ask you to summarize now, because we want to...
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
I guess the most important issues I've said, I think the biggest strength of our program is that it empowers dancers and makes them more independent. Because that's one of the things I also would like to add. As a program, we are independent, and therefore we can very much work on a confidential base with dancers, and that's incredibly important.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
Okay. So now let's turn to a whole different sector. I'm going to ask Angela Mondou to speak in a moment. Angela is the president of Canada Company, a national nonpartisan charitable organization to support the members of Canada's military and their families. In addition to providing scholarships for the children of soldiers, Canada Company helps veterans find civilian jobs. So here we're talking about a whole different sector, a whole different type of transition, and maybe some very similar types of concerns, but probably some marked differences too. So Angela, if you would please tell us about what you're doing.
So I thought I would summarize. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I thought I'd start by summarizing what my challenge is, or what our challenge is, in terms of helping veterans and military members transition to the business world. So here's my description in a nutshell. We have to help a master sniper from Afghanistan find a job and describe to the business world what he or she did. That's tough. First of all, so the challenges really that we deal with that I think are similar to the world of dancing and athleticism is that, first of all, it's very difficult for the individual transitioning to know what it is they can do on the other side. That's our biggest problem. So huge part of what our organization does is educating, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other challenge is we spend a lot of time helping the business world and the receiving end understanding what those skill sets are that they're receiving. So really, at the end of the day, our whole model is built around helping both of these organizations. I really call it helping shift the culture of Canada to understand the value of this remarkable talent. So there's a lot of work that goes behind that, as all of you know. What our model is based on, two kind of components to what we have. We started out in 2012 focusing on military employment transition, primarily because when a war stops, and in this case it was Afghanistan, a lot of members tend to transition. But we do have about 5,000 a year military members looking for second careers. They might be just retiring, getting out at a young age, transitioning because they have to leave the forces for medical reasons. So 2012, we started our program. And it has really two components. One is what we call self-directed. It's a web-based platform where we've started adding tools, drop-down information. We offer webinars, we offer resume writing, videos. We have 60 videos up there, and you guys will meet Dwayne later. He's on a panel, Dwayne Cormier. He is a transition counselor, has been for decades, and there's 60 videos of Dwayne, which he says the A to Z of how to transition from being a member in uniform, taking that uniform off, going through that process that you've all described before you actually look at that second career. So he's very adamant that there needs to be that process behind it. So we have this web-based platform, but just having that in itself would not lead our members to getting jobs. We have a very small team behind that does a massive amount of hand-holding, coaching, supporting, doing conferences like this, and really managing that educational arm to what we do. I didn't bring my glasses, and I made all these notes to tell you, so I can't even read what I wrote up here. But let me just tell you a little bit about the educational side. We have less focus on the psychology. I heard a lot of counseling and kind of the psychological support. We actually don't have much of that in supporting our members. But in terms of the educational piece, as I mentioned, what I've tried to help my team understand is developing a one-to-many solution. Probably like many of your organizations, we're not really well staffed. We don't have huge funds. So we try and do a lot of webinars so we can send a message out to as many people across the nation. On our system now, or our platform, we now have 7,000 members registered. 4 years ago, we had 35. So a big part of communicating across the nation as well, so that people understand that these services are there. So the one-to-many thing has become really important to us, doing one large conference a year where we bring as many members in transition to the table, as well as companies that are willing to support them. I'm kind of all over the map right now. The other big piece about in terms of what we do, and I think where we really add value, is educating the businesses. So we work with HR teams, hiring managers, and we do training, webinars again, as much as we can to help them understand everything from the different kinds of skill sets, what rank levels might mean, what kinds of roles and jobs these companies might have that might really translate well to some of the skill sets that we're connecting. So it's, again, a big focus of our small team is on educating that business side and helping the business world understand the value of the talent. That's probably something that there's a commonality with, right? The one last thing that I can share, that I'm happy to share, we're self-funded fundraising model, but we were able to, after 18 months of begging the government, able to secure a $1 million contribution to our program. All of that money is going to drive the development of our online platform. We're actually going to create a match.com for vets and businesses, if you will. We seriously are. So it's a searchability database where we're going to be connecting the skill sets. The members will go on like a LinkedIn or a Match.com, fill in a profile of their skills, their experience, who they are as a person. The business world is going to be doing the same on the other side, and the database is actually going to help connect potential employers with potential skills of veterans. So we're really excited about that because, again, this is enabling our small team to kind of offer a service that thousands of people can have access to. So that money that we're getting is going to help drive that the kind of the expansion of this online platform and portal. And then it's also going to help us develop educational programming. So we're going to be building videos around transition topics. Again, that one-to-many. So those will be online available. They'll be focused on both the veteran, but very much focused on the hiring managers, the people at the end of the day that are going to be causing the employment, which is really how we're graded, is how many people get hired. So it's kind of a happy story. It's tough work. I keep saying we have a lot of work in Canada. I met a business leader last week that said to me, "Oh, you're supporting veterans transitioning. Yeah, they must have amazing skills, but you know that hierarchy and like, how could they come in? How could they come into our business world and be empowered to take on stuff when they're so used to the rank and file?" And I said, "Oh, here we go again." I'm a veteran, by the way. I was in the military for 9 years. I was so empowered. At 27 years old, I was in the middle of a war zone coming up with a plan, and my colonels and majors were waiting in Canada to hear what I came up with. The mass amount of delegation and empowerment is huge. The business world doesn't look at it like that. They see sergeant rocks and hierarchy. So that's another big part of the success of a model, is really causing that cultural understanding. I'm going to stop there because I'm kind of rambling up here.
Right. Thank you. That was very
Thanks for having
interesting and I think new to most of us. Finally, Jean Moyle is has a doctorate in sports and exercise psychology. She has been she's a graduate of the Australian Ballet School, QUT Dance, is that how you say it?
Yep.
And a dancer with the Queensland Ballet. She has been the head of student health and welfare at the Australian Ballet School, a senior advisor at the Queensland Academy of Sport, senior performance psychologist for the Australian Institute of Sport and the Olympic Winter Institute of Australia, and so on. She is on the Queensland board of the Psychology Board of Australia, a board member of the Queensland Ballet, a member of the Queensland Academy of Sport Performance Health Advisory Panel, a national committee member of the Australian Society for the Performing Arts Healthcare, and joined QUT Creative Industries faculty as head of discipline in dance in 2012. So, tell us about, I think that you're going to actually be a great bridge between both sport and dance. And so maybe talk a little bit from that perspective.
Yeah, sure. So certainly in terms of my experience, I've worked in both elite sporting and obviously the performing arts sector and in career transition specifically. What's been really fantastic in looking at a whole range of transition organisations, from a distance and being able to talk to people here, is that Australia is a young country in terms of colonisation. We're 228 years of age, although we're very, very old from an Indigenous cultural perspective. So when we're talking about the sport world in Australia, the models that have been existing there are actually really fantastic, and certainly where dance is paired with sport previously has been with athlete career and education programs, which have now shifted into performance excellence programs. So within the sporting context, career transition is looked at and we had huge funding changes within the Australian sporting system, whereby instead of the national and state sporting institutes being funded specifically, that they would then give the money to the sports. That funding has now gone directly to national sporting organisations to actually, that they're running their own programs. So now kind of the career transition and education processes through personal excellence have actually shifted to advisors sitting within the national sporting organisations and not necessarily the sporting institutes. So that's been a significant shift in the last little while, but one that's been seen to be very helpful. If we shift across to dance, I kind of feel like we got up and running and now we're back to crawling again. So we have no national transition centre or organisation in Australia at all. We did have the SCOPE program, which was back in 2005, a pairing between the Australian Institute of Sport and Ausdance National. So Ausdance is our national advocacy body for all types of dance across Australia and has state bodies as well. So that pairing was fantastic, and so dance learnt from, at that time, the athlete career and education model, and there were sport advisors as well as advisors such as myself that had come from a performing arts background that worked within that system. After a couple of years, that funding model shifted and the Sporting Institute kind of was removed from that equation, and the Ausdance National took on that program and then changed to Scope for Artists. So it ran in effectively a similar way, but that was really trying to start that kind of dance area actually taking full responsibility for that. Unfortunately, funding didn't continue for that program. So that program finished in 2009. So we've actually been without a national career transition program for dancers since that point in time. So it's like really devastating. However, there's lots of work still being done, but again, it's kind of gone back to that individual model in terms of responsibility. So what I did do earlier this year, 5 of our major dance companies in Australia, so the Australian Ballet, Queensland Ballet, West Australian Ballet, Bangarra Dance Theatre and Sydney Dance Company, so the last 2 are contemporary companies, actually came together and petitioned to the Australia Council for the Arts to get funding to undertake a research project in looking at what was happening around the world in terms of many of you in the room and your organisations, and then for myself to go into each of the companies and interview the artistic directors, executive directors, dancers, staff, retired dancers, to get a sense of what each of the companies were doing, as well as the issues that they were presenting from an Australian perspective, because I don't think that kind of research in Australia had been done since Jeff Throsby back kind of in the mid-2000s. So out of that research project, which I was trying to get released before I came here, unfortunately it hasn't got approval yet, but I'm working on it, the companies were really keen to understand, because they vary so much in terms of size and funding and the funding models that they have. They wanted to be able to learn from each other and actually start that ability to have a conversation as kind of 5 of the major employers of dancers in Australia, what they could actually be doing. So that varied. So you had the larger companies that have had dancer transition funds in existence for quite a long period of time, that have had lots of people in terms of transition within roles within the company as well as externally and being retrained, access to sports psychologists in terms of counselling and career transition services, right down through to organisations and companies that, they recognise, what's the great thing is they recognise how important this issue is, but they haven't got anything formal in place. So part of this was also that ability to understand what's worked for the other companies that have been doing something, and what are also too are the dancers identifying as necessary or that they really think is really important. So what came out of that was a range of recommendations for the companies and for Australia Council of the Arts to consider in light of that. So nothing new from everything that's been discussed here in terms of issues, but certainly what was interesting was the difference in terms of the perspective of how do we actually fund this program. So the models of how can dancers actually, put into a scheme, but that might be actually at the company level, not necessarily a national scheme. How can they put into a scheme that's matched? How can the company, for example, one of the companies does performances whereby they don't use a live orchestra, so all the money from that performance gets donated into the Transition or Career Development Fund, right through to the kind of easy win-win scenarios of establishing mentoring, using the connections that the company or even the board members have to enable dancers to go out and see what other jobs are kind of like without having that commitment of, many of the dancers talked about, oh, I don't really know what I want to do, so if I I'm holding off putting into the transition fund where they existed to actually do courses because I don't know if that's the course that I want to do. So again, similar kind of challenges. A key thing was the emotional counselling side of things, so it was recognised, and most of the companies did have a sports psychologist or qualified psychologist available from a network perspective, some of which they would fund dancers to go and access. Other times it was that the dancers would have to pay for themselves. And the financial aspect was another key area in terms of actually that ability to how am I thinking about my own money and how am I managing that so that I get to a point where I either do or don't have the choice of retiring and I've got something there that enables me not to be forced potentially into a position of taking a job just for the sake of it whilst I actually explore different options in that way. So the range of kind of services that many of the organisations here do, they recognise, and that's the kind of model that they want to operate from and are operating from. They're just having to find and access it in a different way. We had significant funding cuts in the arts in Australia last year, which we haven't quite recovered from. And what that also meant is that, again, depending upon the size of companies, they just fight to get funding to exist and to employ dancers, let alone think about this from a let's petition the government for funding for career transition versus let's just fund, ourselves existing. So they're looking to the philanthropy and sponsorship sector around targeted programs in this way. And again, it was great in terms of doing the research in the benchmarking of the different examples, and I think that was really great for the companies to see where they don't have that kind of central aspect. Ideally, a model that exists in terms of dancers putting into a scheme that companies match would be fantastic, but that I feel is a little way off in Australia at the moment, unfortunately. So that's probably kind of where we sit at the moment. There's the whole other side of things, which is the independent dance scene. So that's just, 5 companies. There are a number of smaller companies in Australia, both in contemporary and some smaller ones in ballet, but a huge and dynamic independent, mainly contemporary dance scene. So where that kind of gap is for those dancers, that's where AusDance, as an advocacy body, tries to step in, but it can only step in to a certain level. It provides professional development activities, both across whether it's legal, financial, flagging that there are associations like the Australian Performing Arts, Society for Performing Arts Healthcare, where there are people, doctors, psychologists, physios that specialise in working with these kind of things, so that they've got the knowledge of where the networks are, but again, that's self-funded. So they're looking for ways forward, at least in terms of, as major employers, how they can work better together in terms of sharing knowledge and capability to look at this, and the potential too that many of the dancers, like happens in other countries, shift between those companies often. So what might be a future potential model in that way? Sport's kind of great up here and we've kind of slipped back a little bit. There's still lovely connections between the two, but I think that's also a bridge that I think that we can actually get across and reconnect again going forward. So that would be the state in Australia at the moment.
Thank you very much. So in my case, I am a child of a dancer transition, the Dancer Transition Center here. But early days, I did my transition in 1989 and 90. And what I'm hearing is a real evolution in the scope of services that are being offered, because back then, first of all, I felt rather isolated. There was no social media. I was living in Ottawa, which is, not a huge city with tons of dance there. But also this idea of, it was, at that time, it was really a sense of like, you get money, you take a course, you've now transitioned, you've got a new identity, right? But, like this whole idea now of approaching the person in all of their, all the various aspects of who they are, including, as you said, Lauren, social, religious, cultural, gender, all those things are also, that's a real change and a real leap forward from my perspective too. One thing that I'm thinking about listening to all these is there seems to be quite a big range in the sort of the size of the program, the number of people that you go through, the size of your sector. Relatively, I think dance is probably smallest. Then the military is a huge number of people, and sports can be probably even bigger in terms of the total number of people. How many people actually get to use the service of these transitions services, and what can be done to sort of make it more accessible, I think, and prepare people sort of to start thinking about their transition as they're doing their sport or dance career.
Well, the number of people that are using the services of our program, that I would like to make a distinction between those who apply for financial support and those who just consult us for either career counseling or some other types of questions that they have related to their dancing career. In average, we see about 200 dancers per year, and we talk to them about the questions that they come across while related to their dancing career. We have, in average, a number of 12 people who apply every year for the support for the study and income allowance, which means that they are doing a full retraining. And then on average, over the last couple of years, we've seen 40 to 50 people who apply for the refund of study costs, so a maximum of 10,000 euros that they can apply for. So that's in the total number of dancers working in the Netherlands. That is about 600, to put it a bit in perspective. I realize I forgot to mention one important thing, is that the funding of our program is not just by the contribution made by dancers and companies, but on top of that, we receive funding from the national government. And in terms of the different sorts of the total, the funding in total is determining approximately 2/3 of our total funding. So 1/3 is coming from the dancers and companies, and 2/3 is coming from the national government. Of course, we didn't start with that amount. Like I said, we just got a starting budget. And over the years, by just, let's say, proving how successful we were able to convince the Ministry of Culture to raise the budget each and every time. Unfortunately, we've also had to deal with cutbacks on the cultural budget in 2013 in the Netherlands. And therefore, we're also receiving less funding than we used to receive, and we're still facing some other issues, but it's still there.
Do you have any comment, Lauren?
I don't have exact numbers, but certainly it's very important to note that Career Transition for Dancers is the only national organization that reaches out to all dancers, both union and non-union, and the numbers keep growing with new dancers coming in and dancers who are saying, I think I'm ready to think and talk about this with somebody, going out. Plus, certainly with social media and an online platform, we sometimes will never know how many people are being reached. If they're watching one program, I think that counts as somebody's having, being now aware of the program versus somebody who has been in a counseling situation for 6 months and has gotten gotten a grant and then is going back on a panel and talking about what their experiences are. So the numbers are always growing, and the potential is unlimited, you know, and so part of the challenge is always Christopher was telling me yesterday about a program called Pack to Go. Is that programs to go? We're having, you know, again, being able to, promote to many, many people at once, you know, knowing what people need locally is going to be often sometimes different than what they need nationally, and being able to provide some general information as well. So these are programs that are always going to be available, you know, to everybody in that community, not only now, but somebody looking hopefully 2 or 5 years from now. And word of mouth will help programs spread as well. In terms of sport in the United States, besides the, the U.S. Olympic Committee's ACE program, I'm not aware of any program that represents all sporting, programs in the United States. So it's very, very singular, and some sports, are multimillionaires. You come into baseball or football with a minimum salary of $750,000 annual income. There's no dance company that can offer that to even their top dancer. So we see what the dichotomy is, about that. But there's, I think each sport is growing and seeing that as more members are leaving the sport, they're going to have that population as well as everybody coming in.
That on that point, Lauren, one thing we've started doing, we realized we were helping hundreds of veterans a year transition, but we weren't asking for them to give back. So now we've started a commitment, like when you get any kind of software and you have to agree to it, we're getting our members, when they register, to agree that they will become an ambassador just for using our service. It costs them nothing, but they have to give back, because that network of people that go through the process to the other side are probably our best evangelists, best teachers. So we're going to see how that goes. We just started that a few months ago, but we're finally getting smarter about capturing that group that has transitioned and getting them to come back and support the programming.
Great. We're going to turn now to the audience and see, if you have any questions, either for a particular speaker or in general on the topic. Oops, sir, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sophie from Quebec. I'm currently doing my PhD on the career transition subject, so I've studied all of your organization. I'm so glad you're here. And I read about 50 times that career transition book. And so I had difficulty to find research of or evaluation of these programs. Like when you build a big program like that, is there any research that evaluate the effectiveness of parts of these programs? And if yes, how do you evaluate that?
If I may respond to that, there are several individual organizations, transition programs that exist that have actually researched their results. If I talk for the Netherlands, we found out that 80% of our dancers who are have been supported and used the study and income allowance, they have been able to find a job within a year after they have been retrained. And that's a huge percentage if you compare to other similar organizations, let's say. Not necessarily dancer transition program, but other measurements to get people reintegrated in the labor market, so to speak.
Anyone else have anything to offer on that question?
Well, any program that's a not-for-profit program has to file an annual report,
Yep.
and many of them are going to be found through foundationcenter.org, for instance, or through other, organizations that are looking at how much people are bringing in and what their services are providing as a start for that.
So,
And I imagine, as part of, for those organizations that do their own fundraising, they also have to sort of put together their success stories and make a real case for the value of their services and why they should receive contributions from business or government, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
One mic today, or yesterday.
I wonder if the panelists might be able to talk about how career development for adult learners is evolving or not, and also how responsive the education system is to, for example, clients that come through Canada Company. Are we moving more towards recognizing lifelong learning and recognizing how adults can contribute? I heard about knowledge and skills and valuing the talents that veterans have and professional dancers and professional athletes have. But are the educational institutions responding to that, or is it still a system that caters more to youth than it does to adult learners?
That's a great question, and I didn't touch on that much. Dwayne Cormier is in the audience now, and so we've had phenomenal support across Canada now. Dwayne is managing a group called our Educational Consortium, and what's happening in post-secondary institutions is the prior learning assessments and the training that our veterans receive are either being recognized on the educational platforms, and they're getting some portions of certification. So they may need one more year of certain courses to receive a certain certificate or degree. But the wonderful move forward that we've made from an educational perspective is that all the training that our military members are receiving, all of it, some of it, is being recognized by a variety of different programs. When I got out in '94, that didn't exist. I basically came out with probably what's equal to a master's in project management now, or supply chain management. I was a logistics officer. So the work that Dwayne's doing, and I think this is something to be said for your sector as well, because if the educational institutions are looking at our certifications for transition and enabling, I call it time to employment, helping them more seamlessly get to that second career, it shouldn't be difficult to jump on that bandwagon and leverage the efforts that we're doing for the veterans, for the dancer and athletic side as well.
And we're certainly in Australia, the education institutions, I was having a conversation with Amanda Hancock the other day about where there is recognition, certainly dance into dance degrees, which is different in Australia in that you can platform from, say for example, you're a professional, you come in, you get credit, recognition of prior learning to a certain point, which you only have theory units to do, which might take you a year. You can then platform that to general credit into like a psychology degree or other things. So certainly that system is in place, and what we're also doing at the Queensland University of Technology is working with the relevant dance companies around what's the training that they're doing in their pre-professional and training programs. Whilst it's not registered training at the moment, it's competency-based. So how are we recognising those kind of transitions when they're not quite within the Australian qualifications framework in terms of recognition of levels? So it is happening and it's possible, yeah.
In the United States, there's actually a LEAP program that stands for Liberal Education for Artist Professionals, and through St. Mary's College out in Northern California. And they recognize both life experience and dance experience towards credits, towards a liberal arts degree for many dancers around the country. Many dance companies also have a special affiliation with a local university or a city or a state university, to have their dancers who are on a very different schedule than most folks being able to take certain classes and courses there as well. And most of the sports organizations have also made arrangements with certain universities that they're funneling some of their folks into those programs, whether it's a liberal arts program or a business program. And I know there's a panel this afternoon, looking forward to hearing more about what's happening there.
And in general, in Europe, lifelong learning is very much a subject which has attention not only nationally but also on a European level. In that respect, it may be interesting to mention that the IUTPD is now starting a research project together with the Federal VIA Actors Organization, looking into the possibilities to set up transition support in Europe and what's at stake at the moment, and specifically focusing on setting up a program in Hungary, in Belgium, and in Spain. So that's really, I guess, an interesting development.
Great. I think we have time for one quick question. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I have a question. I'm representing the Royal Ballet of Flanders and the Flemish Opera House here today, and we are on the same pace as Jean in Australia, not having a transition center at this point. And therefore, I wanted to ask you your opinion in what way ballet companies can contribute to a sense of transition project. Like, what would you advise a ballet company could do at this point?
Look, certainly in terms of from the research and talking to the various companies and the dancers and levels of staff, I think there's a range of small things that won't have, impacts in terms of resources, but are easy to organise. So there's lots of discussion around how do we run things at lunchtime where we can get, whether it's people within the company's family that actually have transitioned themselves, and people kind of know that but don't get to hear their stories. There's the actual, how do you go and job shadow other people that you're interested in, like, people job shadowing artistic directors, choreographers out into the production or admin side of things. There's obviously what we see is a lot of, dancers when they're off injured, going into some of those roles and assisting in that way. So that's been happening for obviously quite a while. But the other aspects were if there was, some funding that, aside from the transition, setting up a transition or development fund that could support retraining and counselling, the opportunity to get career counsellors in that provide, they were quite interested, the dancers, in group sessions around a range of different topics, whether that's kind of life skills, finance, development, to then go to be introduced to ideas about consideration of parallel career development and transition, to then have individual sessions that explore for them what it is. So for many of them, it's limited in terms of, as you all know, time, to even explore other things, whilst it's recognised by the artistic directors that we want people to be going and exploring other interests and hobbies because it brings back to their artistry in terms of what they bring into their work. There's small things that the company can organise and use its networks to be able to do, as well as trying to actually look for different funding models to support where people do have an idea of retraining and new qualifications, as well as support for the kind of career counselling and psychology side of things. So I think there's a broad spectrum of things that can be done easily within the means of a company, as well as how do we set up structures and processes to get some money to actually support the bigger ticket items. Is a short answer.
And of course, we're touching just the surface of many of the issues we could talk about all day just with this panel alone. So I encourage you to speak to the speakers individually. I would like to thank you all very, very much.
May I still make?
Paul would like to make a final remark.
Since Michael mentioned this morning, this is about networking. I would like to ask my colleagues who are representing the transition program to raise their hands. So then you know who
That's great.
you
That's
could
great.
direct yourself to if you have any questions considering the programs that are at this moment in place in different countries. That's what was my last.
Thank you very much. And thank you all. And we'll continue the day now. Thanks.